panelists sitting with me here at the table. And two of them are joining us online, and it feels almost normal to be sitting around a single table, ladies and gents. We have an impressive panel here with us of some thought leaders of several partner organizations of the Humanitarian Energy Program. We're going to mainly focus on the access to modern energy challenges. Now, what we've asked the panel is to prepare a very snappy 2.5-minute presentation. They're all very used to giving long speeches, but we've asked them, please keep it short. We'd like to hear from all of you, but we also like to make time for the roundtables later as well. So what they're going to be talking to us is mainly what are their organizations have been up to personally, tackling these challenges, but also what are one or two important things that they hope to see in the future going forward. So I think this is going to be good for us to also think about our own thoughts and see how they align with the leaders of these organizations as well. So we have 6 speakers, and please, I apologize already if I get your last names wrong. We're going to start off with His Royal Highness Jaime de Bourbon de Parma, who is the Senior Advisor for Private Sector Partnerships at Unhcr. And I would also like to congratulate you, Jaime, on becoming the new Climate Envoy of the Netherlands very recently. You're joining us online, I guess, from the Switzerland, but please let us know. The word is yours.
Yes, no, thank you very much, and congratulations on reading out the long names. That's quite difficult. No, it's great to be with all of you, and Rosa, thank you for having us, and on the Climate Envoy, it's going to be this summer, but indeed last Friday I was nominated to be the next Climate Envoy of the Netherlands, so I'm very much looking forward to it. But in this call, I'm the Senior Advisor for Private Sector Partnership at Unhcr, the UN Refugee Agency, and one of the areas when I started that I saw that most potential for private sector engagement was the energy transition question in the refugee space or in the humanitarian setting in general. So I'm very happy to be here with you. And Brian, thanks for your presentation. I found it very interesting. And what we've done at UNHCR is kind of an extension of what Brian has been doing, people-centered clean energy transition, and we call it the Clean Energy Challenge. And the Clean Energy Challenge is the largest sort of initiative within the humanitarian space, where we put a goal, which is how do we bring cleaner and safer energy to the refugee setting in this decade of action. It's an advocacy campaign to bring awareness, and it's a collaboration space for people to get together. And we've now been at it for 1.5 years, and UNHCR has developed its energy strategy. It's built up its energy team. It's expanded it by bringing the team for facility management, which deals with UNHCR's own energy use, also on board of that objective. And we hired an innovation expert, innovative finance expert, and when we launched the Clean Energy Challenge, now we have about 250 participants from different backgrounds, from private sector, NGOs, and governments joining in and having pledges around it. So we're quite happy that it's really taken off. But on the concrete side, where are we as UNHCR? And then I'll round up. We've developed a specific energy project, mostly COVID related, for energy for infrastructure of hospitals, of water and sanitation, etc. But these are traditional grant-based solutions. The second thing we've done was innovative finance infrastructure. So we've developed a green fund, which is to de-risk our own energy investments, to translate our diesel generators in the field to solar solutions. And we're developing new innovative finance tools beyond UNHCR, really for refugees. And as soon as these are online, we'll share that information with you, but it's really exciting. And thirdly, we're working on large market-based projects. And one of them is here on board, is Mercy Corps, but also we're talking to GIZ, KfW and others to see how we can do that. And does UNHCR have a role to play to be an anchor customer? And we're in the midst of figuring out, can we, in which context can we do so? And is it viable, yes or no? I'll leave it to that, but there's a lot of things happening and we're very excited where it's going. Back to you.
Jaime, thank you very much. I also especially appreciate you sticking to the time limit that we have set for you. And the Climate Energy Access Program, of course, is like a sister program for the Access to Modern Energy program. We will talk about it a little bit more later on during the discussions. I would like to now call upon our second speaker for today, Marcel Ratz. He's sitting right across the table from me. He's the team leader for global public goods, energy and climate change for Netherlands Enterprise Agency, what we call the RBO here in the Netherlands. Marcel.
Thank you, Susan. And does the microphone work? Okay, great, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. And well, as a manager for energy and climate in RVO, I've been closely involved and watching also the access to modern energy trajectory over the last 6 to 8 months. And so I'd like to start off with congratulating and applauding both the participants and also the teams of DJSI and RVO with I would say, a tremendous challenge, which was intense in some cases. In some instances, it was also very challenging and maybe a bit of people turning people afraid on making new contacts, exploring new partnerships, working with new sectors. But I think at the end of the day, it was a trajectory that delivered on innovation, on new approaches, and on new partnerships. And I think partnerships is for me the main, I would say, the main element of discussion of going forward. Your question was, in the preparation of this panel discussion, what would you see as next steps? For me, the next step, the most important next step would be to continue the discussion between the humanitarian sector, within the humanitarian sector, and between the humanitarians and the development organizations, the private sector and the finance sector, because I believe that only if these sectors come together with comprehensive solutions for energy access for refugees and displaced persons, that's the only way that we can achieve success. And we've seen that in the access to modern energy trajectory as well, where we've seen that at the beginning, there was still getting to know the subject by humanitarian organizations. Then we brought in the development organizations, the private sector, who already has lots of experience on energy access and developing energy access markets for the last 15, maybe to 20 years. And because it's not a new team in the development sector. Building markets for poor people with energy products and energy services is something that we have, I would say, profound experience meanwhile, both on cooking and electrification. And for the past years, we've been trying to bring this experience into the humanitarian domain, discussing this with humanitarian organizations as well. And there it seems that all these organizations have been working more or less in a silo for the past decade or so. And only by opening up these silos, by learning to understand one another, to see where the strengths of the other organization is, but also where the weaknesses are that we can complement on one another. That's the reason, that's the way where we find ourselves in a situation where we can come to really good solutions. And solutions are already there. I think it's time to realize that as well. In the last 5, 6, 7 years, we have been piloting, demonstrating that market-based solutions can work in the humanitarian environment. And I would like to point out also to a publication that the NDEF program will be bringing out in somewhere this week, where we have collated the experiences of 14 organizations in this field, working with market-based approaches in situations of displacement. And I would like to call on the participants of this webinar also to read it, take the recommendations by heart, and then move together in concert, in partnerships, from individual pilots to more systemic changes.
Right.
I think,
yeah,
that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcel. So your focus is on partnerships. So a lot of the activities have been happening on the development side, but you're talking about bringing that focus also on the humanitarian side over here. All right, thank you. Next up, I'd like to call upon Rijntje van Haringen. I hope I got your name almost correct. Who's the director for CARE Netherlands. Rijntje, so CARE is one of the biggest humanitarian organizations that is out there. And you've been doing activity on the development side for a long time. But can you tell us what you've been up to on the energy side of things?
Love to. We do a lot of work related to climate change, especially climate change adaptation. And maybe to start off, I couldn't agree more with Marcel that this is something we can only face if we work together in partnerships. If we're talking about access to renewable energy for local households and communities. And I think there's others than us that will continue to work on the technological innovation, that will continue to work on the business case side of things and on looking for involvement of parties that can help invest in these kind of solutions. And what I really think, and Brian mentioned it as well in his presentation, that it will only work if we are very clear about the social implications and social acceptance of any solution. And I think that is where care would come in, because that is what with which our solutions stand or fall, with the enthusiasm of local uptakers of solutions, with them being involved in developing those solutions or adjusting them to what they need on the one hand. And I think we also need to be very much aware, especially when it comes to energy, that the impact on a community is very much also on the women in that community, especially if we're looking for cooking solutions, knowing that traditionally that is a role that women fulfill. And that there is a whole set of social norms in those communities that might impede or facilitate that innovations and solutions are really being taken up. So I think that is where not just us as NGOs come in, but also the relationship that the equitable partnerships that we manage to have with local organizations and with community-based organizations, so that they become part of the system change that Marcel just mentioned, and that I think we need to establish all together and at different levels.
Right. Okay. So Rensha, you're also talking about partnership with a special emphasis on women and the local communities and the local organizations over here. All right. Thank you. And next up, I'd like to give the word to Suying Lai, who is the manager for the SAFE Gold Unit at Oxfam Novib.
Thank you very much. I would like to bring in a new dimension, and I'd like to do this by telling a story. In 2007, it was the first time that I had a duty trip for Oxfam Novib, and I went to Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland. And I remember at the time being so shocked by just the terrible emissions from the cars. I don't know what it was, but it was black. It was making everybody filthy and people very sick. And in the hotel, when I wanted to order a Sprite, I got one, but it was 3 years over date. And when I returned to the Netherlands, I heard rumors that apparently in the past there had been nuclear waste thrown into the seashore of Somaliland and Somalia because of the lawlessness. So I wanted to share this story to just illustrate that so often the places where we do humanitarian work, actually, people are living in, I guess the places where products that we don't want, that we in rich countries don't want, are being dumped there, and people don't have alternatives. Now I want to go to another place. I've never been to Silicon Valley, and neither private or for a business trip. But if I think about the type of technological innovations they're talking about in Silicon Valley, they're talking about the roaring 2020s. The things we hear about are electric vehicles, solar energy, clean energy, the Internet of Things. So basically having products with smart sensors on them, 5G, 3D printing, blockchain, and decentralized finance. And when I hear about these things, I get so much energy, and I think, wow, our lives are going to change in ways we cannot even imagine. So I think for us, and this is particularly the case, I think for rights-based organizations and NGOs, is how can we marry the issues of justice and equity with all these technological advances, which definitely in the places where we have the resources, we're going to benefit tremendously. But I think that question of justice and equity is really very key. So and if we just think about what will this mean for the energy transition, I'm thinking about things like doing humanitarian action actually before the disaster strikes. Because if we have smart data and we know that something's going to happen and we act preemptively, it is so much cheaper and more sustainable than having to repair afterwards. I think about things like a circular humanitarian economy, making sure that things like solar are the default. We try to minimize waste, and waste that is created is recycled. And finally, I think it's very important for us to have the mindset of an investor, dare I say even venture capitalist, that we really think big, bold, and think about investments to really create change in a very, at scale, so that we don't think of grants, think of, more short-term iterative solutions, but think big. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Suring. You've coupled quite some important topics in the 2.5 minutes. So we're going to try and unload them a little bit later. So according to you, so some of the most important things are emphasis on justice and equity for the local communities. And combining with technology to come up with preventive measures. And you also talked about creating a circular humanitarian economy. So that's something that hopefully we have some time to talk about later today as well. Let's move on to our next panelist. We welcome back Carmen Hagenaars, who's sitting to the right of me. She's, again, to reintroduce herself, she's the Deputy Director for Inclusive Green Growth at the Netherlands Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Welcome back, Carmen, please.
Thank you, and thank you also to my panelists here for your words. I think it's inspiring to hear the different angles, and I think from our end, as a ministry, we try to bring different stakeholders together. I think one element is the partnerships, as Marcel already mentioned, aligning better the humanitarian efforts with the efforts that we have on energy access. I think that's a main point for us. And also to have more innovations. We try to fund also smaller projects that have innovations in itself. But then there's also the point of raising awareness, to put it on the political agenda, to put the theme on the agenda. I think we're heading towards another few summits at the end of this year in New York, or hopefully otherwise virtually. But the high-level dialogue on energy is a good moment also to put on the agenda items such as a better link or better alignment between humanitarian efforts and the efforts on energy. I'm very much positive on where we stand. I think the next main challenge is basically to build upon the progress that we've already made. There is already a lot of projects now here on the table, the pioneering stage. We have to keep that alive, to keep on pioneering and to take on the opportunities that we have in order to do more. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Carmen. So then from your speech, I take away, you think there should be more emphasis on the policymakers and their work in this regard. And hopefully we do have some of the summits later on this year. Very important to have those discussions. And then I'd like to call upon our final speaker, who is also joining us virtually, Thomas Volkrup, who is the team leader for sustainable energy in displacement settings at the Global Plan of Action. Thomas, I actually had the chance to look at your previous speech during one of the programs for the AME program. You gave an elaborate keynote on this topic, but we'd like to hear if you had to pick one or two things that stand out for you, what would they be?
Thank you. Yeah, for those of you who don't know the GPA, it is the central platform for everybody interested in this topic of energy and displacement settings. And we have the pleasure also to run this Clean Energy Challenge together with Jaime. So if you're interested in this topic, do visit our website. I've added it in the document. I have actually 3 messages I would like to leave with you. And it's a message of long-term, medium-term, and short-term. And the long-term message is don't lose the goal out of sight. The goal is SDG 7, meaning providing energy access to all the people, clean cooking and electricity in the next 9 years to come. And that means, just to give you a magnitude of the challenge ahead, that means we have to transform roughly 3 to 4 sites, camps from Unhcr in the next 9 years every month. So this is the magnitude we are talking about here. So this is the long-term goal, clean energy until 2030, and that's also the goal of the GPA. And so we need to go large scale. We need to be bold. It's great to have programs for a couple of thousand households. It's really important, but we need large scale. We need programs for camps, for countries, and not just for a couple of households. The second point is, and that was mentioned already a couple of times, and I cannot emphasize this more, the medium-term goal is the cooking issue. we really need to work on this. And that's also hopefully the area where we see a lot of progress. We've seen in the meantime now some interesting small-scale electric cooking solutions with solar panels. And we, even with our team, we organized a hackathon where we developed a small e-cooking solution for less than 50 Swiss francs. So in real prices, it's probably something like 5 francs when we scale this up. So the cooking topic is extremely important. And the third point third message from my side is, and that's sort of a message to the whole humanitarian sector: stop burning money. We are running thousands of diesel generators every day, and every time we turn on this generator, we're burning money, literally burning money in these camp settings or in these settlements. And there are ways out there to make this, to solarize these energy infrastructure. We have leasing models, as Marcel said, there are experienced models out there from the development space. We just need to use it. And if you're also interested in this topic, do visit our website. We have a couple of examples, and there are also links to documents that are supporting this. So this is something which you can start actually tomorrow.
All right. Thank you very much, Thomas. So to sum up your talking points, focus on goal SDG 7, focus immediately on cooking issue, and focus less on earning money. I think the last point also something Sir David Attenborough wrote in his last book, to focus less on the growth, but focus on the efficiency and the redistribution of existing resources. All right, now we actually managed to have some time for a panel discussion, so well done, everybody. The first topic I'd like to bring up is actually regarding the cooking issue. Thomas, maybe you can start, and the others panelists, maybe you'd like to answer that also. So I have been involved in a program called the DFCD, the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. So we are seeing quite a few cooking projects come through over there, and they're doing it at a very large scale already. They're talking about several hundred thousands of cooking devices being distributed in Africa, Asia. So where do we stand right now, and how far do we have to go still?
Well, to be honest, where we stand, it's always difficult to say because we don't have proper data. We know from previous and anecdotal data from various camps and settlements that roughly 80% of the displaced populations are still using firewood. However, we see tremendous progress, and we see great examples, for example, from Bangladesh, where Unhcr and IOM rolled out an LPG program to roughly 800,000 people, Rohingya refugees, and we see this is an example. It is possible also on a large scale. Yes, this costs money, but on the other hand, it reduces the tension with the local population. It reduces tension on the environment. We see less flooding. We don't see the deforestation in these camp settings. So it is very important to use LPG as a bridge, but over the long term, it's about electric. At least that's my opinion.
Okay. All right. So transitioning to electric from LPG could be one thing we could focus on in this aspect. Heimo, would you like to add something to that?
No, just to reiterate that cooking solutions is the tough nut to crack. And indeed, in Bangladesh and Rwanda and some other countries, we've made that transition, but that's because the government forced us to, and there was no other way out, and there was no access to any wood or other alternative for refugees for cooking. But the majority of refugees really have to fend for themselves. It's not in our budgets to actually have massive amounts of money to pay for energy for refugees. All that money is actually used for life-saving activities. That, you know, and energy is the next thing on the line. And we are reviewing our life-saving packages to see if some sort of energy solution should be included. But if you look at that scale, to set up a big LPG sort of market-based solution in Bangladesh, that's a massive enterprise, which we don't have the staff to run. We've set it up around Bangladesh, but we can't do it in every refugee setting. That's why we need to get others on board. And that's why it's also a big call for action for donors, development donors, to move in where they already have the experience in cleaner cooking, but also electrification, and expand their programs also to include refugees. And why in the humanitarian space are refugees so essential? Because we're talking about very large populations that are there on average 16 years and longer. And we're not just talking about refugees, but also those communities who have big markets. So within the humanitarian space, we're treating them as if it's an immediate emergency, but they're there for a long time. So we're actually talking about rural electrification. And that's the expertise of development actors and some private sector actors. So it is waking them up and getting them on board to engage in this sector as well. Back to you.
Right. Thank you, Jaime. So we double down. So one of the immediate issue to focus on is cooking, and perhaps it's also focusing on the refugee aspects, giving them access to these sorts of resources. The next thing I found a very fascinating point from the discussion that was brought up by Suying over here. She talked about having the mindset of a VC going forward. Would somebody like to react on that? Oh, maybe you want to add on to something to give a little bit more of context, then we can bring in the other speakers.
Sure. I mean, I can give one example, and I know I talked about it to some people in the past. I mean, I know that a lot of colleagues, everybody knows that solar energy is better than using those bloody generators. But then very often we still see that when we want to do the kind of capital investment to buy the solar panels, it is still not eligible by donors. And then we end up going for the generators and then every month indeed burning the money. And I think there it's still very much a mindset of kind of, okay, grants of projects. Instead, if we all know these are protracted crises, and if we think of, okay, it's very unfortunate, but we know these people are likely going to be here for so long, let's do the capital investment. Let's look at it from kind of a sustainability, a more durable solution perspective. And then we actually save money, but also have lots of benefits. So I think that is something I would like to see much more in the humanitarian sector. And I think it also gives a type of energy that is very important. We are all seeing a situation of increasing needs, dwindling or funds, or at least no more funds. And I think that puts you in a kind of a poor person's mindset. And then you start thinking about immediate, what can you do now, instead of thinking that horizon. And that's very important.
Right. All right, so bringing energy into the energy sector.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Rensha, would you like to react to that?
Yeah, and I completely agree that there's an issue here with being in it for the short term, which we sometimes are as humanitarians, and we think on short-term solutions and then we're out of there.
Yeah.
But the organizations locally that we work with will either stay there in a protracted crisis situation or will be making a transition to a development situation. And I think we can't just... There may be certain disasters where you come in with that kind of short-term mindset, saving lives, and then you're out of there. But most of the crises that we are currently working in are not like that. So you need to be in there with a longer-term commitment and with a longer-term vision. I completely agree with you.
Right. Marcel?
And maybe to build on that, for one, I agree with Switching. And if you look at the, let's say, the generation or the electricity consumption of the humanitarian operations, switching from diesel to solar, from an investment perspective, that's almost a no-brainer. It's the specific circumstances that are troubling us now. But in my experience and to my knowledge, good solutions are available or under development. I'd like to expand that with what was also said. If we should also look with an investment perspective to the energy situation of refugee households, of let's say their livelihoods. Take this long-term perspective and say, we would like to invest in the energy agenda of refugees now at this point, and our payout will maybe not be monetary, but it will be an impact. It will be in livelihood. It will be in economic development of these households. It will be in health. It will be in gender impacts. And I think from a refugee or within the refugee sector, we should look at these long-term impacts and try to, maybe not even try to monetize them, but look at it with an investment perspective from that angle as well.
Yeah. Okay. How do we do that though? Yeah, please.
I want to react also to what Jaime said earlier. He said at the end, I think it was the government that forced the sector to work differently. I think we should not underestimate the role of state actors, both for good as well as for bad. And again, you know, going back to, if we think from a business perspective, I had read that when Biden was elected, all the stocks that had to do with kind of renewable energy shot up immediately. They did fall afterwards, but there was a sense of, yes, because of what Biden wants with you know, the climate change agenda, this is where the energy is. And I think that the government therefore has a very important role to also create an enabling environment. And I feel that also now, you know, also with the involvement of the ministry with RVO, this is also in a way creating partnerships, having the discussion. It's also pushing things in a certain way, which I think is good. Right. And I think we need to do that much more, because government have the power to really kind of set the parameters.
Okay.
And there's a parallel with the development sector as well there now. Huh? We've been pushing in the development sector within energy access for markets for the last 10, 15 years. But now in the last year or the last years, I would say, we come to a realization that there are limits to the market, and that we can use the market instruments, but we have to add some financial incentives, grants, subsidies to that market situation, also in the development spheres, also when it comes to clean cooking or decentralized electrification. So let's find one another there between the humanitarian sector and the development sector, and address this jointly also with national governments.
Right. Okay. All right. So we touched upon a couple of things. Thomas and Jaime, would you like to join the discussion? How can we move beyond grants and subsidies to have this VC mindset?
Go ahead, Thomas. I'll add on.
I think it depends what we're talking about here. When it comes to household energy, especially cooking, let's face it, colleagues, this will always be a highly subsidized product. There's, at this moment in time, only probably a handful of sites globally where refugees are living or displaced people are living who can actually afford clean cooking solutions without subsidies. However, in the electricity side, and also in the when it comes to greening the energy infrastructure, replacing diesel-powered infrastructure, there's definitely a business case. That's no question at all. It's we see payback periods of an average of 4 years. We see payback periods. We had a project in Djibouti where we just did energy transition, energy efficiency measures, included, for example, including new air conditions, and we saw a payback, or we see a payback period of less than 2 years. So as Marcel said, also it's a no-brainer, and here we do see that this humanitarian space can actually be a sector for the private sector, for an interesting business case for the private sector. So the question is, how can we use the money we are currently spending on diesel for solar, bringing in the private sector, and they will also find solutions to provide electricity services for the people, at least for the small businesses in these camp settings. So that should be the immediate goal, I think, from our side.
Right.
No, I agree. There's already money there. As Thomas said, a good catchphrase for this meeting is "Don't burn any money." I think that's a good thing. We're spending money on diesel generation that can be spent differently. It will always be a hybrid solution, by the way. It won't be full solar. It will always be a mix, because you're in the middle of nowhere and you need energy during the nights as well. So, and the storage capacities is sometimes a big question mark. So, but yes, I think don't burn the money, but we also need the big development programs to extend their programs into the refugee space. It's easier to extend an existing program in a certain country than to set up a whole new development program, because UNHCR and other humanitarian agencies don't have the capacity and skill set to write out a big development program, which is nearly a PhD in detail that needs to be developed. So it is about extending existing programs into the refugee space, or the other way around, extend refugees that same service. So back to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Thomas. Jaime, we can close off the discussion with a remark from Rijntje.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, triggered by the fact that especially cooking solutions always need subsidy, that we just started as CARE International Confederation offsetting our unavoidable CO2 emissions. And we're doing that through a project with the Fair Climate Foundation, where we're funding a clean cook stove project in India with the funding that we get from offsetting our own emissions. So I think it speaks to the investment issue, but also to distribution of wealth in a more equitable way.
So there you go, everybody. We're already talking about some solutions here.
It's open for investments from others.
So again, repeating Rensha, the Fair Climate Foundation, right? And together with CARE, they're looking to invest in some interesting climate projects. But also something that I am working with, also a project from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. So these are some projects that you can